Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? I don't mean neglected. I mean truly invisible. Like you're a ghost. My husband and daughter perfected it into an art form. But their final masterpiece, my destruction, had a fatal flaw. Me. This is a story about reclaiming your own narrative. If you've ever had to fight to be seen, you'll know what I mean. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? I don't mean just being ignored or taken for granted. I mean truly invisible. Like you're a ghost haunting the hallways of your own life. My husband, Mark, and our daughter, Chloe, had perfected turning me into one. They didn't use magic, they used silence. It started subtly. A question left hanging in the air, unanswered. A story I'd begin at the dinner table, only to have them start a new conversation as if I hadn't spoken a word. At first, I made excuses. Mark was 45 and under tremendous pressure at his engineering firm. Chloe was 17, a senior in high school, and her world revolved around friends, college applications, and the kind of teenage angst that made parents a necessary inconvenience. So I told myself it was just a phase. I made myself smaller, quieter, hoping to ride it out. But tonight, the silence was different. It was a solid thing. A wall built between us at the dinner table. I had made chicken parmesan, Mark's favorite. The cheese was perfectly melted. The sauce was bubbling just right when I pulled it from the oven. Now, it was getting cold on his plate. He hadn't touched it. Instead, he had his newspaper unfolded to its full width. A rustling paper shield that completely obscured his face. All I could see were the tips of his fingers, gripping the top edge. "How was your day, Mark?" I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet dining room. The only response was the sharp crackle of a page being turned. It was a deliberate sound. A punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I was never meant to start. Across from me, Chloe was just as walled off, her face illuminated by the bluish glow of her phone. Earbuds were jammed into her ears, sealing her away in a world that didn't include me. The only sounds were the faint, tinny beat leaking from her headphones and the soft clink of my fork against my plate as I pushed the food around. I wasn't hungry anymore. The effort of trying to exist in this room had stolen my appetite. I remember when this table used to be the heart of our home. I closed my eyes for just a second, and a memory, warm and bright, flickered to life. It was Chloe's 14th birthday. The table was covered in a cheap plastic tablecloth with balloons on it. There were pizza boxes stacked high and a slightly lopsided chocolate cake I'd baked myself. Mark had his arm around me, and we were both laughing as Chloe blew out her candles, spraying a little bit of wax onto his shirt. The sound of her laughter was real then, a sound that filled the whole house. We were a family. We were solid. I opened my eyes. The memory vanished, leaving behind the cold reality of the newspaper wall and the glowing phone. The silence pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. I felt a familiar chill creep up my spine. It wasn't a phase. This was a decision they had made together. I just didn't know why. After dinner, I cleared the barely touched plates. They moved to the living room, settling onto the sofa to watch some loud, obnoxious reality TV show. I could hear the fake drama and canned laughter from the kitchen. I finished washing the dishes, my hands moving automatically in the warm, soapy water. When I was done, I dried my hands and walked into the living room, thinking maybe, just maybe, I could wedge myself back into their world. "What are you guys watching?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The moment I spoke, their conversation stopped. It was so abrupt, it was like a switch had been flipped. Chloe, who had been laughing at something on the screen, turned her head toward me. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. But she didn't see me. She looked through me, her gaze flat and empty, as if I were a pane of glass. Then she turned back to the TV. Mark didn't even bother to look. He just reached for the remote on the coffee table and turned the volume up a few notches. The message was as clear as if he'd shouted it. "You are not welcome here. You do not exist." I stood there for a long moment, frozen in the doorway. The canned laughter from the television seemed to be mocking me. I retreated, walking quietly back up the stairs to our bedroom. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, my heart pounding a dull, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror on the closet door. I saw a 43-year-old woman with tired eyes and a few more gray hairs than she'd had last year. I was a librarian. I was a mother. I was a wife. But in that moment, I felt like none of those things. I was just fading. I tried to rationalize it again, my mind scrambling for any explanation other than the cruel one staring me in the face. Maybe they were mad at me for something I did. Something I don't even remember. Maybe this was some kind of bizarre, silent treatment that would end as suddenly as it began. Mark is just stressed, I whispered to my reflection. Chloe is just being a teenager. But the words sounded hollow. Lies I was telling myself to keep from shattering completely. I had spent 20 years of my life dedicated to this family, to making this house a home. And now, it felt like the house was rejecting me. The next morning, I was up first. As always, the smell of coffee brewing filled the quiet house. I heard Mark's footsteps on the stairs. He came into the kitchen, dressed for work in a crisp suit. I had it laid out for him the night before. I stood by the counter, holding a mug of coffee I had just poured for him. Exactly how he liked it. A little cream. No sugar. Good morning, I said, holding the mug out to him. He walked right past me. He didn't turn his head, didn't acknowledge my existence in any way. He went to the cupboard, took out a different mug, and poured his own coffee. He didn't look at me. He didn't speak. I just stood there, holding the coffee for a man who was pretending I wasn't even in the room. He walked to the door, and as he left, it clicked shut behind him. The sound was so final, so definite. It was the sound of a lock turning. That was the moment the denial finally broke. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a phase. This was a plan. I spent the day in a fog, going through the motions at the library. But my mind was miles away, replaying every slight, every ignored word, every empty stare from the past few weeks. It was a pattern, a deliberate, systematic erasure. When I got home that evening, I knew I couldn't face another silent dinner. I needed something. Anything. A piece of paper that would prove I wasn't going crazy. I remembered our home insurance policy was up for renewal, and I thought the documents might be in Mark's briefcase, which he'd forgotten in his rush to ignore me that morning. I found the briefcase in his home office. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked the latches open. I sorted through the files inside work contracts, financial reports, and then a thick manila folder that had no label. It felt heavier than the others. A cold dread washed over me as I pulled it out. It wasn't insurance papers. The document on top was titled, in stark, black letters, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. My breath caught in my throat. I sank into Mark's leather office chair, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me. My eyes scanned the pages. The cold, Impersonal legal language blurring in front of me. It was all there. Meticulously detailed. The house was to be sold. Our joint savings and investment accounts were to be divided, though the numbers looked strangely smaller than I remembered. It even outlined custody arrangements for Chloe, as if she were a small child and not a 17-year-old woman who was a co-conspirator in my slow execution. The terms were designed to limit my access to her as much as legally possible, and then I saw it. At the bottom of the last page, on the line designated for his signature, was Mark's familiar, confident autograph, written in black ink. He had already signed it. He had already ended our marriage in his mind. And on paper, all that was left was for me to be pushed out, stuck to the line just above his name. The line for my signature was a small, yellow sticky note. On it were 2 words, written in his neat, block handwriting. Sign here. That was it. No conversation. No explanation. After 20 years, this was how it ended. With a command on a sticky note, and in that moment, every piece fell into place with a sickening thud. The weeks of being treated like a ghost. The cold shoulders. The silence, it was all a strategy. They weren't just ignoring me, they were building a case against me. They were trying to make my life in my own home so unbearable that I would be the one to leave. So I would look like the one who abandoned the family. So he wouldn't have to be the bad guy. He could just be the poor, long-suffering husband whose wife finally snapped and walked out. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep. Too cold for tears. It was a betrayal so profound that it felt like it had frozen my insides. I sat there for a long time, staring at his signature. At that yellow note, a strange, chilling clarity settled over me. He thought he had me backed into a corner. He thought he had erased me so completely that I would just obediently sign my own oblivion away. He was wrong. I stood up from the chair, my movements calm and deliberate. I put the papers back in the folder and placed it neatly back in the briefcase. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, the same room where I had questioned my own sanity just the night before. I pulled a worn canvas duffel bag from the back of the closet. I didn't pack much. A few changes of clothes, my toothbrush, the book I was reading, the essentials. I wasn't running away. I was making a strategic retreat. With the bag in my hand, I walked back downstairs. I took a piece of paper from the notepad by the phone. My hand was perfectly steady as I wrote a short, simple message. Gone to think. Don't worry about me. It was vague enough to be true. But it gave him nothing. No anger. No pain. No ammunition. I left the note on the granite countertop, right where he would see it when he came into the kitchen for his morning coffee. The coffee he would have to make for himself. As I walked toward the front door, I glanced into the living room. They were still there. Mark and Chloe, bathed in the flickering light of the television, completely absorbed in their shared, secret world. They hadn't noticed a thing. I could have been a thief stealing the silverware and they wouldn't have looked up. I opened the front door, stepped out into the cool night air, and pulled it shut behind me. It didn't make a loud noise. Just a soft, final click. The same sound it had made that morning. But this time, I was on the other side, and I wasn't coming back. The drive was a blur of highway lights streaking across the windshield. Hypnotic and endless. I drove for hours, fueled by a cold, hollow energy I didn't know I possessed. There was no destination in my mind. Only the desperate need to put distance between me and the life that had just been revealed as a lie. Instinct, or maybe just memory, guided my hands on the wheel. By the time the first pale hints of dawn were breaking across the Ohio sky, I found myself pulling onto a familiar street, the tires crunching softly on the gravel driveway of the house I grew up in. For a moment, I just sat in the car, the engine ticking as it cooled. The house looked exactly the same, a sturdy, two-story colonial with dark green shutters. A light was already on in the kitchen. My parents were early risers. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of damp earth and the coming morning, and finally got out of the car. My legs felt stiff and unsteady. As I walked up the stone path, the front door opened before I even reached it. My father, David, stood there in his old flannel robe. He's a retired civil engineer, a man of few words but deep foundations, like the bridges he used to build. He didn't look surprised, just sad. He didn't ask what was wrong or why I was on his doorstep at sunrise with a duffel bag. He just opened his arms, and I walked into them. His embrace was solid and sure, a silent anchor in the storm that was raging inside me. He held me for a long time, and it was only then that I realized I was shaking. He led me inside to the kitchen, where the rich smell of coffee hung in the air. My mother, Margaret, was at the counter. She was a retired high school principal, a woman with a gaze that could see right through any excuse or half-truth. She turned, saw my face, and her own expression softened with a pain that mirrored my own. She came over, took the duffel bag from my hand, and gently kissed my forehead. Then, she simply went to the stove and poured hot water into a mug over a tea bag. She placed the warm ceramic mug into my trembling hands. There were no questions. There was only the quiet, unconditional safety of being home. The next morning, after a deep, dreamless sleep in my childhood bed, I found my mother in the garden behind the house. She was tending to her roses, her hands protected by worn leather gloves, expertly snipping away dead leaves. The morning sun was warm on my face. She patted the spot next to her on the old wooden bench, and I sat down. For a while, we just sat in comfortable silence, listening to the birds and the gentle hum of the neighborhood, waking up. Finally, she took off her gloves and turned to me. Her eyes, so sharp and intelligent, were filled with a profound sadness. "You didn't just disappear yesterday." "Autumn," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You've been disappearing for years." The words stung, a slap of truth I wasn't ready for. I started to protest, to defend myself. But she held up a hand. "Honey, listen to me. With every year that passed, you made yourself a little smaller, a little quieter, a little more convenient. You stopped talking about the books you loved because Mark found them boring. You gave up your hiking club because he didn't like spending weekends alone. You tailored your opinions, your hobbies, your very presence to cause as little friction as possible. You did most of the work of erasing yourself. What he and Chloe did, they just finished the job." Tears I didn't know were there started to well up in my eyes. Not just tears of grief for my marriage, but tears of grief for the woman I had lost along the way. Everything she said was true. I had sanded down all my own edges until I was smooth, round, and easily rolled aside. "You're going to stay here for 3 months," she declared, her principal's voice returning. It wasn't a suggestion. "You are not to make any decisions about Mark or your life. You are not to rush. Your only job for the next 3 months is to sit still and remember who you are. You don't make life-altering choices from a place of pain." Later that day, my younger brother, Leo, came over. He was an art teacher at the local high school. With paint permanently smudged on his fingers and a heart that was far too big for his chest. He'd been through a messy divorce a few years back and had come out the other side, wiser and more compassionate. He found me on the back porch, staring into space. He didn't offer platitudes or tell me everything would be okay. He just sat down and handed me a cold bottle of beer. "Mom told me the basics," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry." Autumn. He took a long drink from his own bottle before continuing. "I learned something from my own disaster with Sarah. It took me a long time to get it. But it's the truest thing I know. Autumn. When someone tries to make you feel invisible, they are showing you exactly what you are worth to them. Believe them." His words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Believe them. For years, I had done the opposite. I had looked for hidden meanings, for excuses, for any sign that their coldness was just a temporary fog that would eventually lift. But Leo was right. Their actions weren't a code to be deciphered. They were a statement. "Your job right now," he continued, his voice gentle, "is to forget about being Mark's wife or Chloe's mom. You need to find the Autumn that existed before them. The girl who used to climb trees and sketch in notebooks and argue about politics until 2 in the morning. She's still in there. You just have to find her again." The thought was terrifying. That version of me felt like a stranger. A ghost from a past life. She had dissolved so completely into my other roles that I wasn't sure there was anything left to find. The first 7 days were the longest of my life. I kept my phone by my side. A nervous habit I couldn't break. I expected a call. An angry text. Something. But there was nothing. A complete, deafening radio silence. Not one call from Mark demanding to know where I was. Not a single text from Chloe asking if her mother was okay. The note I left on the counter might as well have been tossed in the trash. Their indifference was the final, brutal confirmation. It hurt more than any angry words could have. It was the detached cruelty of it that finally began to harden my grief into something else. Something colder and stronger. It solidified my resolve. About 3 weeks into my stay, I decided it was time to face reality and update my resume. I hadn't needed one in 20 years. My dad let me use the old desktop computer in his study. As I was typing, an email notification popped up in the corner of the screen. It was from our joint account, which was still logged in on his machine from a time he'd helped us with some online banking. The email was from a Dr. Evans. The name was familiar. She was Chloe's school counselor. My curiosity got the better of me. I opened the email, and then I fell down a rabbit hole that turned my stomach to ice. It was a chain of correspondence between Mark and Dr. Evans, dating back nearly 6 months. I read as Mark, with calculated, clinical precision, painted a picture of me as a woman coming undone. He wrote of my increasing instability, my bouts of depression, and my unpredictable behavior. He positioned himself as the heroic Anmir, worried husband, trying desperately to hold the family together while his wife was falling apart. This wasn't a spontaneous act of cruelty. This was premeditated character assassination. He was laying the groundwork, poisoning the well with anyone who might support me. With my heart pounding in my ears, I opened a new browser tab. I logged into our joint bank account. I had a sick feeling I knew what I would find. I started scrolling back through months of statements. At first, everything looked normal: mortgage payments, groceries, bills. But then I saw it. A weekly transfer. $100. Every single Friday. For the last 8 months. Then, 4 months ago, it increased to $250 a week. The transfers were going to a private savings account, an account in Mark's name only. I did the math, my fingers shaking on the calculator keys. He had systematically siphoned off nearly $28,000 from our shared money. He was emptying the ship before he scuttled it, making sure I would be left with nothing. Just as I was staring at the screen in disbelief, my phone, which had been silent for weeks, suddenly rang. The caller ID said Brenda, my former supervisor at the library. I answered, my voice hoarse. Autumn, it's Brenda. I'm so sorry to bother you. But I just heard. Are you all right? Her voice was full of genuine concern. She told me she had gotten a call from Mark a few months back. He had told her a similar story, that I was going through a difficult time, that I was having a breakdown, and he was concerned my position at the library might be too much for me. He was subtly suggesting I was unreliable, a liability. Brenda, a sharp woman who had been through a nasty divorce herself, saw right through it. I knew right away he was building a case for something. Autumn, she said, her voice full of quiet fury on my behalf. A man doesn't call his wife's boss to express concern unless he's trying to sabotage her. After I hung up, I just sat there in the quiet study, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into a horrifyingly clear picture. This wasn't a marriage that had simply soured. This was a conspiracy. For at least 8 months, Mark had been planning my exit. He moved the money. He fabricated a narrative of my mental instability. He poisoned my relationship with our daughter's school and damaged my professional reputation. And then, he and Chloe had created an intolerable atmosphere at home, designed to force me to abandon everything so he could stand in the wreckage, play the victim, and win it all. I took all of it, the printed emails, the bank statements downstairs to the kitchen table where my parents and Leo were sitting. I laid it all out. No one spoke for a long time. The only sound was the rustling of paper. This was no longer just about my pain. This was about a calculated, malicious attack. This was war. My dad, the engineer, started meticulously tracking the financial patterns on a legal pad. My brother, the artist, began sketching out a timeline of the emotional abuse and the smear campaign. It was in the middle of this grim accounting that I saw a new email pop up on my phone, which I'd left on the table. The sender was a Dr. Anya Sharma. I didn't recognize the name at first. The subject line read, an opportunity. If you're interested. My mom peered over my shoulder. Anya Sharma, she said, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. I know her. She's the director of the Riverside Library System. A few cities over, a brilliant woman. I opened the email. Dr. Sharma wrote that she'd heard from a mutual acquaintance, my mother. No doubt that I might be looking for a new position. She said a senior research librarian job had just opened up. It was a significant step up from my old role. She ended the email with a simple line. Sometimes, a fresh start in a place where no one knows your story is the best medicine. It was an escape hatch, a lifeline, a way out of the narrative Mark had tried to write for me, and a chance to start writing my own. The email from Dr. Sharma felt like a flare in the dark, a pinpoint of light in the overwhelming blackness of Mark's betrayal. It wasn't just a job, it was a geography. It was a place his lies hadn't reached yet. The next morning, with the damning printouts of Mark's calculated destruction still sitting in a neat, horrifying pile on the kitchen table, I called a lawyer my father had found. His name was Mr. Hayes, and his voice on the phone was calm, measured, and utterly devoid of pity, which I was grateful for. I spent an hour laying out the whole story, From the first chilling weeks of being invisible to the discovery of the emails and the siphoned bank accounts, he listened without interruption, only asking a few clarifying questions. When I was finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Miller," he said finally, his tone sharp and clear. "You are not to sign anything. You are not to contact your husband or your daughter. From this moment on, you are a ghost. Block their numbers. Block their social media. Absolute radio silence." "What good will that do?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "It will do two things," he explained. "First, it will prevent you from saying anything out of anger or pain that he can twist and use against you. Second, and more importantly, you let him think he won. You let him get comfortable. Arrogant. Comfortable people make mistakes. Mrs. Miller, they get sloppy. Your job is to disappear and build a new, stable life. Pay your court-ordered child support on the dot once we file. Build a paper trail of reliability. Let him be the one to break the silence. And he will." His advice settled over me, a strange cloak of calm. It wasn't a plan for revenge, it was a plan for survival. It was strategic. For the first time since I'd walked out that door, I felt like I had a sliver of control. That afternoon, I called Dr. Sharma and accepted the job. A week later, I moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment in Riverside, a city where the only person I knew was a library director I had yet to meet. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and new carpets. It was completely empty, and the silence was vast. But it was a different kind of silence than the one in my old home. This silence was a blank canvas, not a weapon. It was mine. Standing in the middle of the empty living room, with the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows, I felt a terrifying, exhilarating surge of freedom. The first 2 months were a blur of work and settling in. I poured all my energy into my new role at the Riverside Central Library. Dr. Sharma was a kind, no-nonsense mentor, and I found a quiet solace in the ordered world of books and research. I was good at my job. I had forgotten what it felt like to be good at something that was just for me. My life fell into a simple, quiet routine. Work. Grocery store. Home. I didn't have the energy for much else. The pain was still a constant companion, a dull ache in my chest that some days was harder to ignore than others. Then, one evening, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. "Mom." The voice was Chloe's. It was thin and cold, stripped of any warmth. My heart did a painful lurch. For a foolish second, I thought this was it. The apology. The explanation. "I need you to sign my financial aid forms for college," she said flatly. "Dad said you're holding up the process. They're due on Friday." There was no "how are you," no "where are you," just a demand. And then I heard it. A muffled voice in the background. It was Mark. Coaching her. "Tell her she needs to overnight them. Tell her it's her legal obligation." The last bit of naive hope in my heart withered and died. She wasn't calling as my daughter. She was calling as his messenger. I stood in my quiet, peaceful apartment, and I felt a shift inside me. The dull ache of grief was burning away, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of steel being forged. I took a slow, deep breath. I'm not having a breakdown. "Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "I'm having a breakthrough." And I hung up the phone. I then blocked her number. just as I had blocked Mark's. The radio silence was now complete. That phone call was a turning point. It was the moment I stopped waiting for them to see me and started focusing on seeing myself. The next 5 years were a reconstruction. It wasn't a fast or easy process. It was built brick by painful brick. I enrolled in a master's program in library and information science, taking night classes after work. The late nights studying, the exhaustion. It all felt purposeful. 2 years in, I was promoted to associate director of the library. I had a career. A real one. That I had built with my own 2 hands. I started to rediscover the woman my mother had told me to find. I started hiking again on the weekends, exploring the trails in the state parks outside the city. I found a small, independent movie theater that showed old black and white films and documentaries. Things Mark had always called pretentious. I learned that I loved the complex, melancholic sound of jazz, a genre he had dismissed as just a bunch of noise. Each small discovery felt like reclaiming a piece of stolen territory. I also found friends. Real friends. A few women from my book club, all of whom had their own stories of survival. Formed an unofficial support group. We jokingly called ourselves the Phoenix Circle. Because we had all risen from the ashes of a former life. There was Maria, a fiery lawyer who had left an emotionally abusive marriage. And Sarah, a gentle kindergarten teacher whose husband had gambled away their life savings. We met for dinner once a month. And in that circle of trust, I could finally talk about what had happened without shame or fear of judgment. They understood. They got it. One evening, sitting on Maria's patio with a glass of wine, I found myself admitting something out loud for the first time. It's a terrible thing to say. I began, swirling the deep red liquid in my glass, but Mark's cruelty saved my life. If he'd just been merely neglectful, or boring, or distant, I would have stayed forever. I would have kept shrinking myself down until there was nothing left. He tried to destroy me, and in doing so, he set me free. It was a monstrous, beautiful truth, and saying it felt like unlocking the final chain. 5 years to the day after I had walked out of my home, I was in my office at the library, finalizing the budget for the next fiscal year. I was 48 years old. I had my own condo, a career I loved, and a life that was peaceful and entirely my own. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. But something made me answer it. Hello? There was a pause. Autumn. The voice was instantly recognizable, yet strangely different. It was Mark. But the confident, dismissive tone I knew so well was gone. He sounded uncertain, hesitant, almost fearful. My blood ran cold. But I kept my voice perfectly neutral. Yes. It's Mark, he stammered, as if I wouldn't know. Listen, I know it's been a long time, but Chloe, she's getting married. He rushed the words out. The wedding is in a month. She really wants you to be there. She misses you. The audacity of it was breathtaking. After 5 years of absolute silence, after using our daughter as a pawn, he was now using her as bait. I could feel the old patterns trying to reassert themselves. The tug of maternal guilt. But the woman he was talking to wasn't the same woman who had left a note on the kitchen counter. I'll have to think about it, Mark, I said coolly. And I ended the call before he could respond. That night, I called an emergency meeting of the Phoenix Circle. I laid out the situation. Maria was the first to speak, her lawyer brain kicking into high gear. It's a trap, she said bluntly. He's trying to pull you back into his orbit. To control the narrative. But Sarah, the gentle teacher, saw it differently. Or maybe, she said softly, this is your graduation ceremony. A chance to see it all. Not as a victim, but as an observer. To close the book for good. They all looked at me. What did I want? I searched my own heart. Past the anger, past the pain. And what I found surprised me. I want him to see me. I admitted. The words tasting strange and true on my tongue. I want him to see what he threw away. Not the broken, invisible woman he tried to create. I want him to see me. Now. My friends all nodded. They understood. This wasn't about him. Or even about Chloe. It was about me. It was about standing in the same room as my ghosts and not flinching. The next day, I called Mark back. My voice was calm and steady. The voice of the associate director. The voice of a woman who knew her own worth. I'll be there, I said. On the other end of the line, there was a sharp intake of breath, followed by a stunned, unnerving silence. He hadn't expected me to say yes. For the first time in a very long time, I had done something he couldn't predict. The game had changed. The 3 weeks leading up to the wedding were not spent in a state of anxiety or dread. They were spent in preparation, but not the kind Mark would have ever understood. It was a quiet, internal alignment. I consulted with Mr. Hayes, Milavier, who gave me a single, brilliant piece of advice. Treat it like a deposition, he'd said. You are there to observe, not to participate. Speak only when necessary. Give them nothing. You are composed, dignified, present only because you choose to be. His words became my mantra. I didn't shop for a revenge dress. I didn't want a fiery red number that screamed for attention. Instead, I chose a dress I already owned. One I'd bought for a library fundraiser the year before. It was a simple, elegant sheath dress in a deep navy blue. It was the color of twilight, of deep water. It was a color that didn't shout. It spoke in a confident, steady voice. It was a color that could hold its own in a room full of pastels and champagne. I decided to go alone. Arriving with a date would have felt like bringing a shield. I didn't need a shield. My presence, whole and self-contained. I was the only statement I needed to make. The day of the wedding, I drove the 2 hours back to my old hometown. The Riverside Country Club was just as I remembered it, an imposing brick building overlooking a golf course so green it looked artificial. It was a place that reeked of old money and new ambition. The perfect stage for the perfect life Mark had tried to build on the foundations of his lies. I pulled into the sprawling parking lot, took a moment to steady my breath, and got out of the car. I walked, not like a woman entering a battlefield, but like a guest arriving at a function she was attending out of polite obligation. I slipped into the crowded ceremony hall and found a single empty seat in the very last pew. I was just another guest. A face in the crowd. From my vantage point, I could see everything. The flowers. The string quartet. The guests murmuring in their expensive suits and pastel dresses. And I could see Mark, standing at the front, looking proud and paternal, shaking hands with the groom. He looked older, a little heavier, but he wore his confidence like a well-tailored suit. He scanned the crowd once, his eyes passing right over me without a flicker of recognition. I was, for the moment, still invisible. And that was fine. I wasn't there for him to see me yet. I was there to see him. Then, The music swelled. The doors at the back of the hall opened. And there was Chloe. She was breathtaking. Her dress was a cascade of white lace. Her dark hair swept up in an elegant knot. She was radiant. A perfect bride. For a split second, the years fell away. And all I could see was my little girl. The one who used to fall asleep in my arms with her thumb in her mouth. A sharp, painful pang of love and loss shot through me. She took her father's arm, and they began the slow walk down the aisle. Halfway to the altar, her eyes, which had been locked on her future husband, drifted across the audience. It was a casual, happy glance. And then her eyes found mine. The change was instantaneous and devastating. The brilliant smile on her face didn't just fade, it shattered. Her eyes widened with pure, unadulterated disbelief. Her step, which had been so graceful, faltered. She stumbled. Just for a second. Catching herself on Mark's arm, the perfect procession had a flaw. A crack had appeared in the flawless facade. Mark, feeling her stumble, turned to her with a look of concern. He followed the line of her terrified gaze. He scanned the back of the room. His brow furrowed in confusion, and then he saw me. The blood drained from his face. The practiced, benevolent smile froze, cracked, and then disintegrated entirely. He looked as though he had seen a ghost. And then it started. The thing I will never forget. His hands began to shake. It wasn't a small tremor. It was a visible, uncontrollable palsy. His carefully constructed world, his entire narrative, was trembling in his hands. He hadn't expected me to come. The quiet, broken woman he had erased 5 years ago wasn't supposed to have the strength to be here. Looking composed and whole. I held his gaze for a long moment, my expression perfectly neutral. Then I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, and turned my attention back to the front of the hall. As if I had just been another guest wishing them well, the rest of the ceremony passed in a strange, detached haze. I heard the words, the vows, the exchange of rings. But my focus was on the man standing beside his daughter. I watched him struggle to regain his composure. I saw his jaw clench. His hands, which he tried to hide behind his back, continue their betraying tremor. And in that moment, watching him unravel from the simple fact of my presence, I had a profound realization. I had spent years thinking revenge was about confrontation, about a fiery reckoning. But I was wrong. The real power wasn't in the shouting. The real power was in walking away. In becoming so completely whole without them that your very presence became a quiet, undeniable testimony to their failure. The moment the officiant pronounced them husband and wife and the triumphant music began to play, I stood up. The guests were clapping, turning to watch the happy couple walk back up the aisle. I didn't wait. My purpose here was served. I turned and walked silently out of the hall, slipping away as quietly as I had arrived. The reception, the toasts, the dancing, none of it mattered to me. I was not part of their story anymore. I was in the parking lot, my keys in my hand. When I heard him call my name, Autumn, I turned. Mark was half running, half stumbling toward me, his tie askew, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was breathless when he reached me. The confident mask was gone. All that was left was a shaken, "Despérate, man." "Why?" he gasped, his voice raspy. "Why did you come here?" I looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time in 5 years, and I felt nothing. No anger, no hate, not even pity, Justavast. Empty distance. You poisoned my relationship with our daughter with lies to her school counselor. I said, my voice as calm and factual as if I were reading a weather report. You systematically stole $28,000 from our joint account. You called my boss and tried to destroy my career by implying I was mentally unstable. I let the words hang in the air between us. That wasn't spontaneous cruelty. Mark. I continued. My voice level. That wasn't a marriage falling apart. That was calculated destruction. And I'm grateful for it. He stared at me. His mouth slightly agape. Unable to process what I was saying. Grateful. Yes. I said. Because you showed me exactly what I was worth to you. And it made me realize I was worth so much more to myself. And with that, I turned, got into my car, and started the engine. I didn't look back. The drive home was different. I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. It was as if a heavy, invisible cloak I'd been wearing for 2 decades had finally slipped from my shoulders. The shame. The questions. The lingering feeling that I had failed, it was all gone. I hadn't failed. I had survived something that was designed to destroy me. As I was merging back onto the highway, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Chloe. My heart gave a single, hard thump. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the road and read it. The message was short. Just 5 words. Why did you come today? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could have listed her father's crimes. I could have expressed my own pain. But what was the point? The war was over. I typed a simple, honest response. Because you're still my daughter. Even if you've forgotten, I'm still your mother. I love you. Chloe. Always have. I sent the message and then put the phone in the glove compartment. I didn't need to wait for a reply. I pulled back onto the highway and rolled down the window, letting the cool evening air rush in, whipping my hair around my face. I realized my revenge was never about watching Mark's world crumble. It was about building my own, so strong and so beautiful that his world no longer mattered. My revenge wasn't a fire that consumed him. It was the quiet, steady peace of my own happiness. And as I drove on, into the twilight, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was finally, completely free.